For today's video, I want to share my experiences with breeding Neocaridina shrimp and hopefully help you get better breeding results in your own tanks. Over the past year, I've raised hundreds if not thousands of shrimp predominantly in these small 25 litre or 6.6 US gallon aquariums, and in all honesty, it's been surprisingly easy. Now, I'm not a professional shrimp breeder and I don't run a for-profit shrimp room, but this video should help beginners get their shrimp breeding as well as increase the survival rates of their baby shrimp. To start off, I want to talk about shrimp selection, and I highly recommend you go with Neocaridina shrimp like cherry shrimp if you're a beginner, because they are one of the easiest options to keep and breed. There's a huge range of Neocaridina shrimp available in the hobby today, but red cherry shrimp are usually the easiest to find in local shops. They are usually very cheap and they tend to breed true. This means that the majority of the babies will keep the red colour that their parents have, which keeps things as simple as possible moving forward with your breeding project. While Caridina shrimp are becoming more popular in the hobby, many of their varieties are trickier to keep and some require specialist reverse osmosis water and very specific water parameters to thrive. Even the hardier varieties of Caridina shrimp like our Marno shrimp still need brackish water for their babies to survive, so they're not ideal for beginners who just want to get into the shrimp breeding colony and start growing their shrimp population in their aquarium. I will touch on water parameters later in the video, but the great thing about Neocaridina shrimp like cherry shrimp is that most people can easily breed them in their tap water without needing to tweak the parameters. So moving on, we get to tank size, and while I've managed to maintain shrimp colonies of around 30 adults and countless babies in my shrimp jars, breeding does tend to be a lot easier in actual aquariums. The larger water volume just gives you more stability while also letting you add more food to the tank, which is key for getting more babies in my experience, and the additional food doesn't throw off your water parameters because of the additional water volume. Like I mentioned back at the start of the video, most of my shrimp breeding is in my 25 litre or 6.6 US gallon tanks, and anything around that size should work really well to help get you started while keeping things small and affordable. If you have the space and budget available, you can always go with a larger tank if you like, but it is not essential. Now, I know that it may not look like it, but my cherry shrimp colony in this tank usually sits at a population of between 80 and 100 shrimp at any given time. I recently started breaking down this yellow Neocaridina tank, and I moved 60 shrimp out of it into my under gravel filter tank and another 50 shrimp out of it into my cold water Wallstad tank, and there's still a few of the original shrimp left in there. As for my Bloody Mary shrimp colony in my Pearlweed jungle tank, I honestly have no idea how many shrimp are in there because there's so many hiding spots, but as far as I can tell, the shrimp colony is doing well in here and there's constantly buried females carrying eggs in there. So next up is the male to female ratio of the shrimp in your tank. Now, I have experimented with this for around a month last year before deciding it was just too much effort and I was just going to let nature take its course in my tanks, but it is something that you might want to try. Now, obviously, you will need at least one male for breeding, but you will be surprised by how often this becomes a problem when starting out in the hobby. Last year, I ran into this exact problem with my orange Neocaridina colony because females tend to hold the most colour, and a lot of breeders will just send out a batch of female shrimp if you only order a pack of 10. If you are ordering from a specific shrimp breeder, you should easily be able to say include a couple of males and they'll be able to tell the difference and make sure you get a mix. But it can be more challenging if you're ordering from a local aquatic shop, so my advice would be to get a comparison photo up on your phone off Google before you go in so you can choose at least one male. Although it's not always the case, male Neocaridina shrimp tend to be smaller, have less colour on them, their coloration can be stripy or patchy, and their abdomen is often a different shape to the females. But the main idea between the male to female ratio when breeding shrimp is that you separate the majority of your males into a different tank and you'll only keep your best, highest grade, most colourful male with your females. The logic here is that a single high quality male can fertilise all of the females in the tank, helping to pass on those stronger coloration genetics to the next generation. Plus, by reducing the number of total males in the tank, you free up additional space that females can go into without affecting your water parameters, and that means more buried females carrying eggs in your tank at any given time. The issue is that this method can take a surprising amount of time, especially in tanks like mine where there are tons of little hiding spots for the shrimp to go to. So, while I did try this last year, I quickly gave up on it and decided to just leave nature to take its course. And in all honesty, even with a natural mix of male and female Neocaridina shrimp in my tanks, they are breeding like there's no tomorrow, especially now that we're into the spring months and things are getting warmer. So moving on, and we get to water parameters, and there's a few theories out there floating around about how GH or general hardness can affect how many baby shrimp will survive in your tank, and I do have mixed feelings on that one. But in my experience, the only water parameter that I've personally seen a noticeable difference with the amount of baby shrimp in the tank is water temperature. Most of my Neocaridina shrimp are unheated room temperature tanks, and during the winter my fish room drops their temperature down to around 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit. The shrimp in these tanks did consistently breed all throughout the winter when it was at these low water temperatures, but it was considerably slower than the warmer months of the year. At the time of recording, we are in early spring and my fish rooms warmed up to around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm already seeing a lot more buried females compared to the winter. In the summer, when this room hits around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit, things will really start kicking off and the breeding goes into full swing. So if I did try to maximise breeding in these tanks, I'd add heaters to all of them and I'd set them to anywhere between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius, which is between 68 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Warmer water just seems to encourage more consistent breeding with these shrimp, and it's a quick and easy way to increase the size of your colony. That said, I do think that GH or general hardness of your water does still matter, mainly because it's important for molting. The right general hardness helps adult shrimp stay healthy by molting their old carapace, and it also increases the survival rate of your baby Neocaridina shrimp because they tend to grow at a far quicker rate as juveniles, meaning that their molting frequency is a lot smaller. Now, a lot of sources recommend a GH of between around 6 and 10 for Neocaridina shrimp, and my tap water sits at a GH of 4. So last year I did pick up some Neocaridina shrimp salt to try and increase the GH into the ideal range just to see what would happen. But in all honesty, I really didn't see any difference in my shrimp tanks, be it with the adult or baby shrimp survival rates, so I eventually stopped using the shrimp salt, and now I just leave a lot of my tanks with a GH of 4 and everything seems to be going perfectly fine. Feeding your shrimp tank for optimal breeding is another topic with a lot of different theories floating around. One of the most common ideas that I see is that you need to feed foods that will break down and spread throughout the tank so the baby shrimp can easily access them. Currently, I do feed a lot of shrimp snowflake food and leaves, but this is mainly because my shrimp absolutely love them, not because I think they are essential for spreading around the tank. And the majority of my shrimp breeding happened last summer before I even started using these types of food in my tanks on a regular basis. Back then, I was mainly feeding fluval bug bites and Hikari mini algae wafers, and these don't tend to break down and spread much, they usually just stay in one spot. So while the idea of scattering food around the tank to increase baby survival rates does kind of make sense and may help in certain tank setups, I'm not convinced that it's made a huge difference in my personal tanks. I do think that this may be because I've tried to set my tanks up in a way to naturally support baby shrimp's growth by offering plenty of grazing areas. For example, my cherry shrimp tank has an absolute ton of Christmas moss in here, which gives the babies plenty of hiding spots and grazing space to feed on algae and biofilm. My pearlweed jungle tank is absolutely packed with grazing surfaces, and my yellow Neocaridina tank has Eliocharis and flame moss serving the same purpose. One thing that I have noticed when it comes to feeding is that my adult female shrimp definitely seem to be saddled and buried a lot more often when I feed them high protein foods, helping to increase the breeding frequency. I personally think this is because it lines up more with their natural diet where they are scavenging small insects and protein-rich foods in the wild. So while biofilm and microalgae and detritus can make up a large portion of their diet without issue, when it comes to breeding, I do think trying to supplement a high-protein food is helpful. As I touched on earlier, the two foods that I primarily use are fluval bug bites and Hikari mini algae wafers, but there's plenty of options on the market. The next tip is to try and avoid tank mates if your only goal is to maximize how many shrimp you can breed in any given tank. Most of my shrimp tanks do have some kind of tank mate in there, but it is worth noting that I'm not actively trying to grow massive colonies of shrimp in my tanks anymore. If I were, I'd definitely be keeping them as shrimp-only tanks. Now, a lot of people say that most fish will eat baby shrimp, and while that is definitely possible, I've personally seen my fish swim right past baby shrimp a lot more times than I've seen them actually try to eat them. That said, having fish in the tank does still add an unnecessary risk if your goal is to boost the survival rates of your baby shrimp, and that risk is easily avoidable. Even with so-called shrimp-safe tank mates like snails, there are still some trade-offs you need to factor in. The main one is that most snails are going to compete for the same food sources as your shrimp in the tank. I don't specifically just mean the algae and biofilm either. My ram's horn snails literally form balls around any food that I add to the tank, making it harder for both the adult and baby shrimp to get their fair share. I do keep ram's horn snails and shrimp together in a lot of my tanks, but I have started to adjust how I feed those specific setups to avoid this. For example, instead of Hikari mini algae wafers, I have switched over to Hikari micro pellets in those setups because they scatter more efficiently without me having to take the time to break the algae pellets up before adding them to the tank. These tiny little pellets then spread out across the tank, and my shrimp seem to love them, and it makes it more difficult for the snails to just form a ball around the food and keep it all to themselves. Another very easy win for improving baby shrimp survival rates is to use a shrimp-safe filter. I recently published a video going over the filters that I use in my nano tanks, and I link to it in the description if you are interested, but to sum it up, air-powered filters like sponge filters, undergravel filters and box filters are usually the best choices for breeding tanks. This is because the air pump that runs this type of filter is outside of the tank, and the air pump contains all of the moving parts, which presents the crush risk for the baby fish, so it keeps things as safe as possible. I also want to quickly touch on plant choices for shrimp tanks, since the right plants can definitely help improve the breeding success rates of your operation. The main types of plants that I recommend for shrimp tanks are usually mosses, liverworts and suswasitang. These tend to provide a lot of surface area and hiding spots, which are perfect for baby shrimp, letting them feel safe and giving them grazing areas for algae and microbiofilms. Then you have the secondary plant options, which are things like stem plants, thick carpeting plants like Eliocharis, or floating plants with long roots like water lettuce or Amazon frogbit. While these secondary plants don't offer as much shelter and grazing areas as things like moss, they are great for helping to maintain safe and stable water parameters, which is also important for breeding shrimp. Now, the shrimp keeping community does seem to widely agree that mosses, especially varieties like Java moss and Taiwan moss, are the best options because they are very easy to keep. At the end of the day, plants are not essential to breed shrimp in large numbers. I personally keep plants in all of my tanks because I prefer the look of planted tanks, but it is possible to breed large colonies without them. If you're running a shrimp-only tank with no predators, then you can target feed your shrimp enough to overcome the lack of grazing areas due to the lack of plants, and you can still achieve great results. I've also seen people use piles of rocks to increase grazing areas and offer hiding spots with great success too. The last thing that I want to cover is maintenance, specifically plant trimming and water changes. In this clip you can see me trimming my pearlweed jungle tank, and I know that it's overgrown, but the heat increases over the last couple of weeks have really ramped up the growth rate of my pearlweed, so I will be trimming it weekly moving forward. But if you watch closely, before I start cutting the plant, I gently wiggle it around to give adult and baby shrimp a chance to move away quickly, reducing the chances of me accidentally cutting them or removing them from the tank when I remove the excess plant. But even with that extra step, I still occasionally find shrimp mixed in with my plant trimmings, so it's definitely worth double checking anything before you put it in the bin. As for water changes, I really don't do them very often in my shrimp tanks because they are very heavily planted, and that maintains the water parameters for safe shrimp colonies in my setups. But if you are doing water changes, be careful where you place your siphon and avoid putting it near moss or dense plants if possible, because that's where the baby shrimp like to hide. I know some people worry about detritus building up in moss in their tanks and causing issues over time, but as you can see in my tank that's over a year old and has had a lot of shrimp bred in here, the moss is perfectly fine and clean and it doesn't need any extra attention. If you do siphon your moss, try and use a traditional siphon that uses gravity to create the water flow, not one of the modern ones with an internal motor or water pump that may present a crush risk to any shrimp that get in. Then, once you're done cleaning the moss, check the bucket that you've siphoned your water in for any shrimp that may have gotten into the siphon, and then pop them back into your tank as required. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I hope you found it helpful, and the tips and tricks in this video should be able to help increase your breeding yields in your own aquariums. Thanks for watching, have a good day, and good luck with your shrimp breeding projects.